The Sentinel's doubt. Commander Nixvari of the Taurian Sentinels stood perfectly still as the transport doors hissed open, her armored frame casting a long shadow across the gleaming hangar floor. The midnight blue plates of her exoskeleton reflected the harsh lighting, ancient glyphs etched into the metal pulsing with a faint violet glow. Four obsidian horns curved elegantly from her helmet, marking her elevated rank among her kind. "This must be some kind of administrative error," she said, her voice low and melodic despite the edge of irritation. Her second-in-command, Drez, clicked his mandibles in quiet agreement. Before them stood a human, significantly shorter than any Taurian, with skin tanned by distant suns and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And he was smiling now, an expression so casual it bordered on insubordination. "Lieutenant Theodore Reeves," he said, extending a hand. "But everyone calls me Theo." Commander Nixvari stared at the offered appendage like it might be concealing a weapon. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Right," Theo dropped his hand, still smiling. "Not big on handshakes." "Noted. The High Command's missive stated you were a specialist," Nixvari said, circling him slowly. The human's armor was unlike Taurian battle gear, it looked almost pliable, with odd pouches and compartments that seemed haphazardly attached. "That's one word for it," Theo replied, turning to follow her gaze. "Combat engineer, field adaptations, improvised solutions, basically, I make stuff work when it shouldn't." Drez leaned forward. "He carries no ceremonial blade, Commander. How can he serve without honor?" Theo patted a small device strapped to his thigh. "Multi-tool. 67 functions. One of them's a pretty decent bottle opener if we ever get shore leave." The gathered sentinels shifted uncomfortably. Among their ranks, levity before battle was considered a sign of mental weakness. "Follow," Nixvari commanded, turning sharply. Her footsteps made no sound as she led him through the vessel's gleaming corridors. The Taurian battlecruiser Void's Heart was a masterpiece of precision engineering, every surface polished to mirror reflection, every doorway perfectly aligned. The sentinels they passed stood at attention, their movements synchronized with practiced perfection. "Impressive ship," Theo remarked, his boots squeaking against the immaculate floor. "Though the decor's a bit severe." "Function dictates form," Nixvari replied without looking back. "Embellishment serves no purpose." "Except morale," Theo muttered, just loud enough to be heard. They reached the training arena, a vast circular chamber with weapons lining the walls and a ceiling that simulated the stars of distant galaxies. "Your combat assessment," Nixvari announced, gesturing to the center of the arena where Krell, her largest warrior, already waited. Krell stood nearly 3 meters tall, his battle-scarred armor bearing the marks of 100 victories. Theo whistled. "I'm guessing he's not here to show me to my quarters." "Survive 5 minutes," Nixvari said flatly. "That is all that's required." Theo nodded, rolling his shoulders. "Any rules I should know about?" "Do not die," she responded. "It would create unnecessary paperwork." The human laughed, actually laughed, and stepped into the arena, selecting a simple training staff from the weapons rack. Krell activated his energy blade, the weapon humming ominously in the silence. The match began with explosive speed. Krell lunged forward with the grace of a predator, his blade cutting through the air where Theo had stood a heartbeat before. But the human wasn't there anymore. He dropped to the ground, rolled, and somehow ended up behind the massive Taurian. "Over here, big guy," Theo called, tapping Krell's armor with his staff. The gathered sentinels murmured. Nixvari narrowed her eyes. The human moved strangely, not with the disciplined precision of Taurian combat, but with an almost chaotic efficiency. He didn't so much evade attacks as flow around them, his movements unpredictable yet purposeful. Krell growled and attacked again, his blade cleaving the staff in two. Theo didn't hesitate, he used the broken halves as separate weapons, striking at joints and weak points in Krell's armor. "Creative," Nixvari observed quietly. When Krell finally managed to disarm him completely, Theo improvised again. He grabbed a handful of training beads from a nearby bin and scattered them across the floor. The giant Taurian, charging forward, lost his footing and crashed down with a thunderous impact. Before Krell could rise, Theo had somehow procured a training marker and drawn a line across the fallen warrior's throat, the symbolic killing stroke. The arena fell silent. 5 minutes had passed, and the human not only survived but had technically won. Unorthodox, Nixvari said as Theo approached, slightly out of breath but still wearing that infuriating smile. But effective. My specialty, he replied. Sorry about the mess. He gestured to the scattered training equipment. Nixvari turned to her warriors. Dismissed. Then to Theo, your quarters are in Section 8. We deploy at first cycle. As the human walked away, Dres moved to her side. He fights without honor, Commander. He fights to win, she replied, watching Theo's retreating form. That makes him dangerous. Or useful, Dres suggested. Nixvari didn't respond. The human was an anomaly, undisciplined, irreverent, unpredictable. Everything she had spent her life training against. Yet something about his adaptability nagged at her, like a flawed equation that somehow produced the correct result. The mining outpost on Ceres Delta wasn't meant to withstand an attack. It was barely more than a collection of pressurized habitats clinging to the surface of a resource-rich asteroid, designed for extraction, not defense. When the distress signal reached the void's heart, it was already fragmented and distorted. Skav raiders, Dres reported, analyzing the transmission. At least one cruiser-class vessel. Scavengers, cybernetically enhanced pirates who harvested technology and organic components with equal enthusiasm, were the scourge of the outer systems. Survivors? Nixvari asked. Unknown. Signal indicates the station's core systems are still operational. Theo, who had been quietly examining a schematic of the outpost, looked up. If the main reactor's still online, that means they haven't completed their salvage. We might have people still alive in there. Nixvari nodded. Strike team assembles in 10 minutes. Lieutenant Reeves, you will remain on the shuttle. With respect, Commander, Theo countered, I've dealt with Skav tech before. Their integration systems have patterns, vulnerabilities. I can help. She studied him briefly. Very well. But you follow my lead precisely. The shuttle ride was tense and silent. The sentinels prepared with methodical precision, checking weapons, synchronizing tactical displays, performing meditation exercises to sharpen their focus. Theo, by contrast, seemed to be tinkering with his equipment, adding odd components and muttering to himself. When they docked with the station, the damage was immediately evident. Hull breaches had been sealed with crude metallic growths, the Scav's techno-organic patchwork. The air inside was thin and acrid. Life signs scattered throughout the processing center, Dres reported. Formation Delta, Nixvari ordered. Reeves, stay center position. They moved through the station like shadows, their footsteps silent despite the heavy armor. The first Scavs they encountered were dispatched with brutal efficiency, precision energy blasts that dropped them before they could raise an alarm. It was in the central processing hub that things went wrong. A hidden sensor triggered, and suddenly alarms blared throughout the station. Doors sealed automatically as security protocols activated. We're cut off, Krell growled, attempting to bypass the door controls. And not alone, Nixvari added, as movement registered on her tactical display. Scavs approaching from 3 vectors. The first wave of attackers came scuttling through the ventilation shafts, once human forms now twisted with mechanical augmentations, moving with the jerky precision of broken dolls. The sentinels formed a defensive circle, their weapons humming to life. Wait, Theo said suddenly, pulling something from his pack. Their neural nets are networked. If I can. This is no time for experimentation, Nixvari snapped, firing at the advancing Scavs. Just give me 30 seconds. Theo insisted, connecting his device to an exposed data port. The sentinels fought with precision, each shot finding its mark, but the scavs kept coming. 28, 29, 30 seconds passed. Then, with a high-pitched whine, every scav in the vicinity suddenly froze, their augmentations twitching and sparking. Feedback loop, Theo explained, grinning. Borrowed the idea from their own tech. Won't last long, though. Nixvari stared at him for a moment, then nodded. Secure the survivors. Quickly. They found the station's crew huddled in a sealed maintenance bay, 12 survivors out of an original staff of 30. As they escorted them back to the shuttle, Nixvari noticed how Theo interacted with the survivors, offering reassurances, small jokes, gentle touches that seemed to calm their fear. On the return journey, she observed him from across the shuttle bay as he helped a young engineer with a makeshift splint for her injured arm. You handled yourself adequately, Nixvari said when he finally took his seat. Theo smiled, but it was different from his usual expression, more subdued, touched with weariness. High praise coming from you, Commander. Your methods are unorthodox. But effective, he suggested. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but perhaps the closest she'd come in cycles. Perhaps. Back aboard the Void's Hard, Nixvari found herself lingering outside the maintenance bay where Theo was repairing equipment damaged during the mission. His hands moved with surprising precision, and he hummed an unfamiliar melody as he worked. You should be resting, she said, stepping into the light. Theo looked up, momentarily startled. Probably. But I work better when my mind's still processing. Helps me think. About what? About how your sentinels move like poetry but think like machines, he said, then immediately looked as if he regretted the words. Sorry. That was accurate, she finished for him, approaching to examine his work. We are trained to eliminate variables, to function as a perfect unit. Which works great until you encounter something completely unpredictable, Theo said, returning to his repairs. Like humans. Like life. He smiled up at her. The universe isn't orderly, Commander. It's beautiful because it's chaotic. Nixvari considered this. Throughout her training, such thinking would have been deemed heretical. Yet she couldn't deny the effectiveness of his improvisation during their missions. Perhaps, she said finally, there is wisdom in controlled chaos. As she turned to leave, Theo called after her, that's the nicest thing you've said so far. This time, she did smile, though she made sure he couldn't see it. The engraved promise. The call to the abandoned research station wasn't part of their assigned patrol route. In fact, Zenith Station didn't appear on any current star charts, officially decommissioned decades ago after what official records called a containment failure. But the encrypted message had come directly from High Command, marked with the highest priority clearance. Nixvari studied the approaching structure through the shuttle's viewport. Unlike the gleaming Taurian architecture she was accustomed to, Zenith Station hung in space like a forgotten memory, all sharp angles and utilitarian design, its outer hull scarred by micrometeor impacts and solar radiation. Charming vacation spot, Theo remarked from the pilot's seat. 3 months aboard the Void's Hard had done little to temper his irreverence, though Nixvari had come to recognize it as his way of processing tension. This station was once the pinnacle of Taurian biological research, she said. Before the Accord. The treaty that ended the human-Taurian conflict, Theo nodded. But this place was abandoned before that, wasn't it? Nixvari didn't answer. Something about this mission felt wrong, the secrecy, the location, the insistence that they bring a minimal team. Only herself, Theo, Dres, and Krell had been cleared for the operation. The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth for a derelict station. Inside, emergency lighting still functioned, casting long shadows down sterile corridors. Life support operational, Dres reported. Minimal power to non-essential systems. Someone's been maintaining it, Theo observed, running his hand along a wall. No dust. Proceed to the central laboratory, Nixvari ordered. Stay alert. They moved through the station in formation, weapons ready. Unlike their previous missions, there was no banter, no casual observations from Theo. Even he seemed to sense the weight of this place. The central lab was a vast chamber dominated by a suspended cylindrical tank filled with pale blue fluid. Workstations surrounded it in concentric circles, their screens dark except for one that pulsed with a waiting message. "Commander," Dres said suddenly, his voice tight. "The security logs. This station has been accessed regularly for years. By Sentinel Command." Before Nixvari could respond, the main screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Vorthax, head of the Sentinel program and her direct superior. "Commander Nixvari," the Admiral's voice filled the chamber. "Your presence confirms your loyalty. Project Eklan must remain secure." "Project Eklan was terminated after the war," Nixvari replied. "By order of the Accord." "Officially, yes." The Admiral's expression remained impassive. "Unofficially, the work continued. The human lieutenant was the final test, to see if you remained reliable." Theo stiffened beside her. "What test?" The cylindrical tank's illumination increased, revealing its contents, a suspended humanoid form that looked disturbingly like Nixvari herself, but with subtle differences. Its skull was elongated, its limbs modified with weaponry merged directly into the bone. "The Eklan project," Admiral Vorthax continued, "perfected genetic enhancement decades ago. The first generation, including you, Commander, were successful but showed concerning levels of independent thought. The second generation corrected this flaw." Nixvari felt as if the deck had suddenly vanished beneath her feet. "I am engineered." "You are perfect," the Admiral corrected. "A warrior bred for absolute loyalty and unmatched combat efficiency. But your batch developed unexpected traits, curiosity, empathy. Weaknesses we eliminated in later iterations. That's why you assigned me to her unit," Theo said, his voice tight with anger. "To see if I could influence her. To test her loyalty." "Precisely. And now the test concludes." The Admiral's tone hardened. "Commander, execute Protocol Sunset. Eliminate the human and return to the Void's heart immediately." Nixvari stood motionless, her mind racing through implications that threatened to shatter everything she had ever believed about herself. Her entire existence, her memories, her sense of honor, her dedication to the Sentinels, all fabricated, engineered as thoroughly as her enhanced reflexes. "Commander," Dres said quietly, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Orders." She looked at Theo, whose eyes held no fear, only a deep sadness. He gave her a small nod, an acceptance of whatever she would decide. "Protocol Sunset," she said finally, her voice steady, "is denied." The Admiral's expression darkened. "Then you have failed the final test. Security protocols have been activated. The station will self-destruct in 15 minutes. Your genetic material will be reclaimed for study." The screen went dark as security doors slammed shut throughout the station. "That went well," Theo said, already moving to a terminal. "I'm guessing we don't want to be here when this place blows." "The Admiral will have locked out all command functions," Dres warned. "Good thing I don't need command access," Theo replied, pulling tools from his pack. "Just need to convince the station systems that we're not here at all." As he worked, bypassing security protocols with improvised solutions that would have horrified Taurian engineers, Nixvari approached the suspended form in the tank. Her doppelganger floated in artificial amniotic fluid, eyes closed as if dreaming of violence. "A more perfect version," she murmured. "Perfect at following orders, maybe," Theo said without looking up from his work. "Not perfect at being alive." Krell, who had been scanning the lab's data archives, spoke up. "Commander, there's more. Files on all of us, genetic profiles, psychological assessments. Even the human." "What?" Theo looked up sharply. Your assignment wasn't random, Krell continued. They've been monitoring your government for potential candidates, humans with specific psychological traits that might influence Taurian thinking. They were studying us both, Nixvari realized. An experiment within an experiment. Got it. Theo announced as the security doors suddenly slid open. We have a clear path to the shuttle, but we've only got about 7 minutes before this place becomes very expensive space debris. They ran through the corridors, the Station 6 calmly announcing the countdown to destruction. As they reached the shuttle, an explosion rocked the docking bay, not from the self-destruct sequence, but from a precise hit against the exterior airlock. Boarding party, Dres warned, checking his tactical display. Sentinel strike team. They're making sure we don't leave, Nixvari said grimly. Krell, get the engines primed. Dres, secure our data. Lieutenant, with me. She and Theo positioned themselves at the airlock, weapons ready as the reinforced doors began to glow red from cutting torches on the other side. You know, Theo said conversationally, checking his rifle's charge, when I volunteered for interspecies diplomatic service, this wasn't in the brochure. Despite everything, Nixvari felt that now familiar twitch at the corner of her mouth. You prefer tedious ceremonial duties? I prefer surviving, he replied. Got any brilliant tactical insights for this situation? The airlock burst open, and Sentinel warriors poured through. In the confined space, the battle was brutal and intimate. Nixvari moved with lethal precision, her ceremonial blade finding gaps in armor, her every strike calculated for maximum efficiency. Beside her, Theo fought with his characteristic adaptability, using the environment, creating opportunities where none should exist. When his weapon was knocked away, he grabbed a fallen sentinel's blade and continued fighting without missing a beat. They were nearly overwhelmed when the station's countdown reached 1 minute. The remaining attackers suddenly withdrew, sealing the damaged airlock behind them. They're cutting their losses, Nixvari realized. Sacrificing their boarding team to ensure we're destroyed with the station. Then let's disappoint them, Theo said, limping toward the shuttle. Krell. Please tell me we can fly. The massive Taurian looked up from the controls. Engines operational, but the docking clamps are locked. Manual release required. Nixvari didn't hesitate. Get aboard. I'll release the clamps. Commander, Dres began. That's an order, she snapped. Lieutenant, you have 30 seconds to convince me why I shouldn't throw you on that shuttle too. Theo grinned despite the blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Because the release mechanism requires 2 people, and I've already figured out how to bypass it in half the time. She stared at him for a moment, then nodded. 25 seconds. Go. They worked in perfect synchronization, her strength and precision complementing his improvisational genius. With 15 seconds remaining, the final clamp released. Run! Theo shouted, and they sprinted for the shuttle's open hatch, diving inside as Krell gunned the engines. The shuttle tore away from the station just as the first explosions began rippling through its structure. The shockwave caught them, sending the small craft tumbling, but Krell's expert piloting stabilized their flight path. Through the viewport, they watched Zenith Station tear itself apart, decades of secret research and forbidden science disappearing in a spectacular blossom of light and debris. Where now, Commander? Dres asked quietly. We cannot return to the Void's heart. Nixvari looked at her small crew, her loyal second-in-command, her strongest warrior, and the human who had somehow become essential to them all. We have the data, she said. Evidence of violations of the Accord, of genetic experimentation, of lies that run to the highest levels of both our governments. The truth, Theo said simply. Yes. And we will ensure it reaches those who need to hear it. She stood straighter, decision made. Set course for the neutral territory in the Arcturus system. We have allies there who will help us. As the others prepared for the journey, Theo found himself alone with Nixvari in the shuttle's small command section. You know they'll come after us, he said quietly. Both your people and mine. Yes. She removed her helmet, a rare gesture that revealed her features, elegant bone structure, iridescent scales along her temples, eyes of deep amber. Does that concern you? Terrifies me, he admitted with a smile. But I've gotten used to terrifying situations lately. You adapt, she observed. It is an admirable trait. High praise from you, Commander. She was silent for a moment, then reached for the ceremonial blade at her hip, the symbol of her rank and honor among the sentinels. With deliberate movements, she drew the blade and pressed its edge against the polished surface of a nearby console. What are you doing? Theo asked. Among my people, engineered or not, our traditions remain ours, she explained, carefully etching precise symbols into the metal. A warrior who finds true strength in another honors them by carrying their name. When she finished, the blade bore a perfect rendering of his name in Taurian script, the characters flowing like water alongside ancient warrior glyphs. I have never done this before, she admitted. But I have never before met someone who showed me that strength comes in forms I had not recognized. Theo stared at the blade, understanding the significance of the gesture. I'm honored. As am I, she replied, sheathing the weapon. Now we face what comes together. As their shuttle disappeared into the vast expanse of space, pursued by those they had once served faithfully, Nixvari felt a strange sense of peace. She had been created to be the perfect warrior, loyal, efficient, unquestioning. Instead, she had become something more complex and ultimately more powerful, a warrior who chose her own path. And beside her stood a human who had taught her that chaos sometimes held more wisdom than order, that adaptation was not weakness but strength, and that true honor came not from blind obedience but from the courage to recognize truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Whatever waited for them among the stars, they would face it not as commander and subordinate, not as Taurian and human, but as equals who had carved each other's names into their lives in ways that could never be erased.